Hello and welcome to Toy Polloi 2. Now in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I go about creating some of the animations that I use at the start of my videos. And these are all based on old cartoons or movie intros that I like and that are representative of what I do on the channel. And I create these all myself using 3 different bits of software. I use HitFilm Express to do the editing, I use Photoshop to create some of the artwork, and then I use a 3D package called 3D Studio Max to create some of the simple 3D animations. Today we're going to be looking at the latest one that I've done, which is based on the toy and cartoon series M.A.S.K. Now the first thing I need to do is actually work out what I want to do. So for something that's based on an old TV show, I'll get the footage of the intro and then I'll try and edit down something that I think will work, just to give myself a rough idea of what I'm going to do. With the M.A.S.K intro, the intro is actually quite complicated. There's a nice section at the start where you're flying over a sort of 3D landscape and it flies down into the entrance of Boulder Hill, and then the rest of the intro gets really complicated with lots of animation. So I decided that I could probably do the first part of it, but the second part with all of the animation was beyond my skills. Also in the show though, there is a great sequence where the agents are selected, which is a simplified computer screen with some effects going on, and then you get these nice sort of line drawings of the agents and the vehicles that they use with a little bit of a voiceover. So I thought the best thing to do was actually to combine those 2 pieces into one sequence. So we have the start of the intro, which is flying over the 3D landscape, and then we break that straight into the agent select sequence and then onto my logo at the end of it. So just using the original footage from the show, this is what I roughed out in HitFilm Express.
Personnel selected: Bruce Sato, mechanical engineer and design specialist. Vehicle code name Rhino.
So as you can see, that gives me a good idea of what's going to work. Obviously the sound isn't right, but the visuals give me a good idea of what I need to create, and I can sort out all the rest of that later on. So the first thing I wanted to do was deal with the agent select screen, because I thought that was going to be the easiest piece. So I make a composite shot out of that selection, and I can then work out exactly what I need to make in Photoshop, because all of that sequence is based on still frames animating along. Now I'm inside the composite shot, I can start taking out frames from the original footage of the M.A.S.K show and then take those into Photoshop and start redrawing them how I want it to look. So you can see in this composite shot in the top right hand corner, I've given myself a small version of the agent select screen. If I scroll through this, you can see each individual frame, and for the computer sequence itself there's loads of these little weird sort of geometric patterns. So what I've done is I export that as a frame, then I scroll on, I export that as a frame, I export that, and go through each one exporting them separately. You'll see that some of them are duplicated, so the red lines there, so we don't need to export that one again. We just do every one that's a different frame. We've got a yellow one there, that's a different frame. So I do that until I've got every individual frame that's needed. I can then scroll on a little bit further because there are a few other shots that we need to make, and these are all things that will be made in Photoshop. We then have this weird transition which is made out of a few bars. So you can see we have this vertical and horizontal bar, and then if we scroll on 1 or 2 frames, that turns into a sort of cross set of bars, so I need to make that version. And if we scroll on again, that's a slightly different cross, so I need to make that one. And then if we scroll on again, that turns into a vertical line, so I need to make each of those individual frames as well. And then we come on to the sort of line art versions of the characters. So you can see here we have Bruce Sato. It's got a picture of Bruce, it's got a headshot of Bruce, and then it's got his mask. So I've taken a screenshot of that as well because I need to create something with my face on it. Then we go on again, and then there will be a different shot a little bit further along, which is of his vehicle. So there is Rhino. So I took a screenshot of that as well. Obviously I don't have a vehicle to drive, but I think I can make something that will work in that image. And then we can go on to the final shot, which is just a headshot of Bruce Sato. So I need to make a headshot of myself. And then at the end that zooms in a little bit. So you can see from that I've got quite a lot of frames that I've exported. I'll take all of those into Photoshop and let's redraw those at a larger scale and make something that we can then import back into HitFilm and start recreating this animation. So here I am inside Photoshop, and I will show you the frames that I have created based on those stills that I took from the animation. So as you can see here, these are the sort of computer loading screens, I would say. It's supposed to be some sort of data processing. I have taken those original ones, I've redrawn them at a much higher scale because the original footage that I was able to find on YouTube was very low resolution. And the videos that I'm creating for YouTube need to be at full HD, which is 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. So I scale up those images and redraw them in my own style. So this is my version of that bit of computer data. So you can see here I've drawn some very basic shapes and added a bit of glow around them. That's the white panel. Then we have the red panel, which is some sort of slightly bent red lines with a red glow around them. We then have the blue one, again sort of blue lines with a little bit of distortion going on and a glow around them. And then finally we have these yellow striped. So those are the 4 images that are used for the loading part of the sequence. I now need to make this sort of white flash transition, which I will do in exactly the same way. I'll bring in those frames and I will draw on top of it to make something that I think will work. So here are the vertical lines, and then if I unhide some of these layers, you can see I've got the cross pattern, and above that there'll be the other cross pattern because it changes slightly, and then we've got the final one, which is the vertical line. All of these are then exported as PNG files because that is what HitFilm likes. For the computer images, I wanted to add a little bit more detail because the original shot is very plain. So I just made a very simple background here with a blue fade on it, and I've added a grid just to make it a little bit more computery. Now for the line art part of this, I'm not a great drawer, but I know people who are. So a few years back, I'd asked my friend Jeremy from the YouTube channel Toy Polloi to make a G.I. Joe version of myself to use in an animation sequence that I've used in many videos. So he had drawn me this version of myself, which I've used in that animation. So I took the black outline of that and use that as the basis for the outline version of myself in this shot. I'm also currently working on a Toy Polloi annual and had asked the artist M.A.K to create a mask version of myself for use in that annual. So luckily I had myself drawn as a mask character with the Toy Polloi tab hole as the visor part of the mask. So I've been able to use that as the line art for the mask shot in this image. So that's the initial shot that you see. That then progresses onto the shot of the mask agent's vehicle. And I thought for that I would show some tools and things that I use on the channel. So doing a quick Google search, I found some nice free bits of line art, one of a ruler and one of a penknife. I've taken those, I've modified them a little bit and turned them into this nice red outline version of a penknife and a ruler, put it on the same background, and that will be my shot that replaces the mask vehicle. The final shot is then another close-up version of the mask artwork drawn by M.A.K. So I just used that, scaled it up a bit and made that a blue version. So there we have all the elements needed for the agent select screen. So I can now go back into HitFilm and start putting these all together. I'm now back inside HitFilm, and using those frames that I've created I can start piecing together this sequence. So again I have in the top right hand corner the original sequence just so I can use that as a guide to work out where the frames go, and I can start scrolling through until I reach a point where I see the first frame. At that point I am then dragged in one of the frames that I've made and I can just switch it on in the background. So you can see there is the white panel. We can then scroll on a little bit more and you can see at that point we need to switch to the red frame. So again I've already dragged this in just so I can show you it quickly. I switch on the red frame, scroll on a little bit more, we get to the blue frame. So again I have to switch on the blue frame and we go along again, then we get back to the red frame. So I can duplicate the red frame I've already brought in and we'll switch that one on because I've already brought it in. So we can see now that we've got a sequence which is starting to match what I have in the corner. So it's white frame, blue frame, red frame, and then what's the next one? We go to the yellow frame. So I do this for the whole shot all the way to the end. So you can see there's about 15-20 times that frame appears, and you can see I have 15 or 20 layers here. If I switch them all on, this will show the full sequence, but now in high res. So if I run through that, you can see it matches exactly what we've got in the top corner, and it's starting to look like the mask show. If I scroll up, you can now see some more frames that I've put in. So the next point in this sequence is the first frame of the character. So I brought in the shot of myself and we can drop that in. So you can now see that appears at the same point. I've actually added a bit of a mask to this one. You can see these black lines. I'm masking off areas because the way this white bar appears, you don't see some parts behind. So if I click on this sequence and open it up and go into the masks layer, you can see there is an animated mask. I'm not going to go through how you do that. If you want to do that, there are plenty of tutorials on HitFilm, and it's quite an easy process, but you can see I've masked that off just so that it animates on and appears properly. And again, I've essentially just sort of drawn over the top of what's going on. We can then scroll on again, and the next frame needs to be the vehicle shot, or in my case the equipment shot. So if I unhide that one, and then the final shot there will be the mask. So there we have the 3 images, and it's starting to come together nicely. nicely. You can see all of those I've put the little bit of the masking on just to hide it. We then need to bring in the white crossfade, and the way I've exported those from Photoshop, they've come out as numbered files. So if I show you them here, I can actually play through them, and they play through as a little animation. It's a bit fast, but you can see what's going on. So I've just brought that in again, made a new layer, and I dropped that over the piece that needs to transition. I've slowed it down a bit. I think I've slowed it down to about 50% of the speed, but you can now see that that animates through and fits quite nicely. I've also added some motion trails to that, so it looks like you get sort of a crossfade between the shots. If we go into this layer, you can see that under effects I've added motion trails. It's a simple way of getting sort of frames faded on top of frames, so you get this sort of slightly cartoony effect, but you can see that works quite nicely, and that adds to the final effect that I'm going for. So once I've got one of those working, I can then duplicate that little sequence again, and I put it over here as well above the next transition, so I'll just unhide that one and do the same on the last one. So if we now play through the sequence, you'll see that we're matching the original shot quite nicely. We've got all the bits happening, everything transitions nicely, and it's looking really quite like the show. You'll also see on this final shot I've added a bit of a zoom, just because the original footage, you can see here that it zooms in on Bruce Sato. So on this shot here, if we go into it, you can see under the transform section I've added a couple of keyframes. So at this point the frame is at 100%. You'll see on the left hand side it says 100%, and by the end of the sequence I've scaled it up to 110%, just so that it looks like it is zooming in. So I've got a shot that I'm really quite happy with. I wanted to add a couple of final features to this just to make it look a little bit more like the show. So in Photoshop I've made myself a computer screen sort of frame, and I will unhide that. It just makes it look like this is on a computer screen. Then I've added a couple of other layers underneath that just add some more effects. So you can see I've added a bit of a glow to the screen, so it looks like there's some reflections going on, and some other very simple effects that are built into HitFilm. As I say, if you want to learn HitFilm, then there are plenty of tutorials on it, and I suggest watching all of those because they will teach you all the things you need to know about making sequences like this. I'm just today showing you how I go about the process. So we've now got this sequence. It's looking really nice. If I play through it, it does look like the show. As you can see, it matches what's in the corner of the screen very nicely, and I think I'm pretty much done with that. So I can hide my original bit of footage there in the corner, and we're left with the final sequence. So I can now switch on that little sequence that I've already dropped in here, and you can see that animates quite nicely, and it's going to look really good. The next sequence is the more complicated one because we need to recreate this little 3D animation. Although this sequence was not originally created in 3D, it's all hand drawn, I'm going to be recreating it in 3ds Max because that's the way I think will be simplest to do it, and I should be able to get a good result with very little effort involved. So here we are inside 3ds Max, and I've recreated a very basic version of those mountains using some simple geometry, and I've applied a texture to it with a grid pattern on it. Again, there are plenty of videos out there teaching you how to use various 3D packages. For my day job I use 3ds Max, so this is the easiest one for me to work in. What I've done here is recreated the shot as close as I can, and I've tried to copy the way the camera moves in the original shot. At the end of the original shot it flies down into Boulder Hill. Obviously I didn't want to do that because that would mean making quite a lot of a model that I didn't really need to do. So I've changed this sequence so that at the end it flies into the Toy Polloi tab hole, which I put into a very basic building. So if I run you through this sequence, you can see the camera flies up, it flies down. I built a very basic road here just because the original shot has a road flying through it, and I thought it was quite nice. And then as we come down towards this building, you can see a tab hole opens, we fly into. It's a fairly basic shot, but it really does everything that I need to do. In the original sequence as well, there is a sun that appears in the top left hand corner here and sort of rises up in a really strange manner. It doesn't look like it rises up properly, so I will be adding that, but I'm going to be doing that inside HitFilm because I think I can animate it and control it a lot better. So now I've got this shot that I'm happy with. I export this as a sequence of frames. So in 3ds Max we call that rendering. So I render out every single frame of this as a separate file. In total there are 180 frames. I will then bring those into HitFilm, and we can start doing some extra things with them and trying to get it looking as close as we can to the original shot. So let's go back to HitFilm and we'll get compositing. So I'm now back inside HitFilm. Those frames have all been rendered, and here you can see this is the basic sequence. If I run through that, you can see we have the mountains, the camera flies over the top, it flies down towards the tab hole, which then opens and the camera flies inside. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I can now get to compositing. So I'm back in the composite window. I brought that sequence in. You can see I have my original shot here in the top right hand corner, just so I can try and copy it as close as possible. And already it's not looking too bad. As I say, there's this strange sun that sort of rises up. So in Photoshop I've just made myself a very quick sort of sun image. I will switch that on, and I've sort of loosely animated it so that it looks like it is moving around. So you can see it starts off behind the mountains, and as I scroll through here I've moved it up and sort of moved it in a strange motion. I'm trying to follow the original animation as much as I can. I think that's not looking too bad. It's not quite the same animation, but it sort of suits what I am doing here. I've then done some other things to this sequence because the original sequence has a real 80s look to it, so you can use things in HitFilm called grade layers, and I can add a little bit of sort of grading to it which adds some tones, and I've used a vignette to darken the edge just so it looks a little bit faded as we go out. I also want to add some motion trails to this render that I've done like I did with the original sequence, because it needs to have a sort of a bit more of an aged look to it. So I'm just going to switch on this effect that I put on that layer, and that just means that you get a slight sort of blurring to the images. I think that's not looking too bad at all. So I can again switch off the layer that I have at the top, which is my sort of reference layer, and I think that sequence is done. We can now put that with the other one. So if we go back to the main part of the editor, so we've now got those two sequences pieced together. I'll hide my sort of rough there and unhide the final version. We can play through that, and you can see that we've got a sequence that's really not looking too bad. It runs a bit jerky because I've got lots of effects on. When we finally output this, all of that jerkiness will go away, but the overall sequence is now looking really not too bad at all. What we're missing is sound effects and voiceovers. So for sound effects, there are plenty of free resources all around the internet. What I do for something like this is I have an idea of what I want, and I go searching for those sorts of sounds. So I've already brought them into HitFilm, and I have this folder of various noises. We can go in here and I can have a quick listen to them. So we've got some odd things here, little sound effects and swooshes and beeps and that. So that's quite a nice sort of computery sound. If I scroll down, I've got some other ones here, which is beeping noises, little sort of computer noises, then some other sort of space age type sounds and things like that. Using those, I then piece together a basic soundscape of something that I think is going to work. So let me switch on some of these audio tracks down here at the bottom, and I'll run through part of the sequence so you can hear what it sounds like. So if I now run the sequence, you'll have some of these sound effects in the background.
Welcome to Toy Polloi.
So as you can see, that makes quite a big difference. It starts to really pull the sequence together. But what we are missing is music and the computery type speech that goes over the agent select screen. Now with all of this stuff, I don't like to use original music, because if you're using the music from the show, chances are you may get a copyright strike on YouTube. So luckily YouTube have a whole selection of royalty-free music. I've been through their library and I found one piece of music that sort of sounds like an 80s tune. It's not that close to the original theme, but it's close enough. If you want to go ahead and use the original music, then you can, but the chances are YouTube will give you a copyright strike. So let me play that sequence again with the music added, and you'll see what a big difference it makes to it.
Welcome to Toy Polloi.
It really does make a massive difference, so always try to add music when you're doing something like this. Now for my normal videos, the voiceover is done by a professional voiceover artist, Jeffrey, who is a big friend of the channel and has helped me out throughout the years doing various voiceovers for me. But we need something different for this. We need a computery type voice. That's where the internet comes into its own again, because there are quite a few text-to-speech synthesizers out there. So let's go and find one of those and see what we can do. And this is the site I used. It's called the Online Tone Generator. you can add your text, you can choose a different person to speak your text, and they all sound quite computery. Now, as I'm filming today, the voice I actually used for the video is no longer here, but I will show you some examples. So you can see here in the middle I've added the text that I want it to say, and we can choose a different person to speak it. So there's various different versions. I'm going to choose the Microsoft Hazel English, and let's see what she sounds like.
Personnel selected. Dave. Toy restoration expert and YouTuber. Channel code name, Toy Polloi.
As you can see, it does sound quite computery, but it's perfect for what we need for this video. When I actually made the original sequence, there were some different ones available, and the one that I'm going to show you back in HitFilm is the one I recorded then, and it's the one that is used on the final sequence. But you can pretty much choose whatever you want. There are loads available. We've got male versions, we've got female versions, and also in different accents. So if I choose the Google Netherlands one, it will sound Dutch.
Personnel selected. Dave. Toy restoration expert and YouTuber.
It's really quite interesting, and it's quite clever how this does it, and it's very useful for a sequence like this. So this is what I used. Let's get back into HitFilm and we'll edit this audio onto the sequence. I've recorded the audio off of that website, and we can add it onto the sequence. And now I will play that section, and you'll hear that we have the computer generated voice, and it matches the images that are on the screen.
Personnel selected. Dave, toy restoration expert and YouTuber. Channel codename Toy Polloi.
It really does make a massive difference, and that really is the final sequence. So let's take a look at it, all complete and all rendered out properly.
Personnel selected. Dave, toy restoration expert and YouTuber. Channel codename Toy Polloi.
Welcome to Toy Polloi.
So there we have it. That is the final sequence. It's taken me almost all of a day to create this, but I'm really pleased with the results. And I'm really hoping that when people see this on my videos, they get that nostalgic feel and understand which TV show I am basing it on. Now, this sort of project does take time, and there is quite a lot of learning involved. So if you want to have a go yourself, I suggest going through a lot of tutorials for the various packages that are out there. You don't have to do something this complicated, but I thought I would show you how I go about creating an intro sequence. Hopefully, though, this will have given you some ideas and inspiration to have a go at making an intro for your own YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And if you've really enjoyed it, then head on over to my main YouTube channel, Toy Polloi, and subscribe there. And thanks for watching.